Oh, it's massive. So, from a sort of perception point of view, China, it's been clear that much of the world's sort of latent negative perceptions of China in terms of cleanliness, in terms of being third world, in terms of their relationship with food, in terms of the density of the population, a lot of those negative perceptions are bubbling to the surface. Some of them are warranted. It's actually a reminder, there's all this discussion of whether or not China is is a developing nation or developed nation. You could tell a lot about a country by the diseases that affect it. China, to a certain degree, is absolutely still a developing nation. I have friends in Wuhan. I know people who have bought meat from that wet market. Their families are not wealthy. They are on the lower end of the spectrum, globally, not just within China. Just in the same way that you can know a lot about America by the diseases that we have. We have a terrible diabetes and obesity epidemic. You can tell a lot about our economies, about our way of life because of that. That's one thing. China is also going to be undergoing a certain lack of trust with their government, honestly. There are some undeniable positives of what the Chinese government has been able to help catalyze over the last 20 years, but there are some definite negatives, particularly the suppression of the news and from the doctors. That has hit very hard amongst the Chinese people.
So do you think the Chinese government may not be reliable with the figures?
It's very difficult during an epidemic to expect accurate figures from anywhere. On top of that, the Chinese government, particularly on the lower level, I think we imagine Xi Jinping going around and personally taking, doctoring these numbers. What often happens is lower level bureaucrats who don't want to be seen as responsible for not containing the outbreak start to doctor the numbers and misrepresent them to the larger organizations. By the way, this is the same thing that happened during the Great Leap Forward. This idea that lower level bureaucrats don't want to be perceived as being incapable by the top brass, and it can lead to disaster. We've seen that in China. There is a real want for that transparency, but they've not been able to execute it. You have this push-pull of this old way of doing things with the recognition that the old way of doing things can be really harmful when you're talking about the spread of disease.
On the other hand, the fact that people do listen to their government in China would make it easier to contain an epidemic.
Well, this is the thing. There is no other country on earth, for the most part, but certainly not a larger country that would be able to quarantine, that would be able to restrict at the level that China is currently doing. If this was to happen anywhere else, the issues around spread would be much more dramatic. There's one other element here that I would encourage everyone to consider, which is the psychological cost to the people within China of having to be essentially either on their own self-administered house arrest, but basically to be locked up with their family for what's now been over a month. So we think about the actual people impacted directly by the disease, that's fine, but you have a country of 1.4 billion people who are afraid to go outside, who are worried about getting enough face masks. On top of that, who have been in close contact with their family members for 4 or 5 weeks now, sometimes their in-laws as well. The psychological cost of an entire nation afraid right now is massive. And again, yes, there's a want to sort of demonize the Chinese government and frankly the Chinese people as well. I would really encourage you to be sympathetic to the plight that the entire population is going through, not just physically but psychologically as well.